Shalom, shalom, y'all. This is your YAW checking in. I kept thinking it was something on my beard here that was shiny, and I kept saying, I can't pick it off. What is that? It looks like a good old gray hair, you guys. Can you believe it? Oh my goodness. All right, so I wanted to get into now Theory of Everything 24, 23. It's Theory of Everything 24. And that would be Unlocking the Code. Theory of Everything 24, Unlocking the Code. Okay, we just got through Saul, David, and Solomon, the first three kings of the United Kingdom. And when I thought up doing this series, I didn't intend it as like a lesson plan for an understanding of each person or a biblical person. It's kind of turned into that way, maybe a little bit, but what I really intended for this to be was a specific timeline of the events in history as the evidence, as the Bible, as Scripture tells it, right? A complete timeline from the very beginning all the way up into the present day. That's what this theory of everything is. And this is why I'm calling it Theory of Everything, because it is a timeline of all the information that we have going up into the present day. So I didn't want to dwell specifically in one era for too long. I want to move from era to era fairly quickly so that people can get a general overview as to what we're dealing with in our modern environment. We should be able to identify as best as possible the figures from biblical prophecy. We should be able to identify ourselves in biblical prophecy, and we should be able to have a destination as to where we're going. So this is the reason why this theory of everything is important, right? And so before I move on to the next era of time, which is going to be the era of kings and prophets, right? Boys, chill out! Before I move on to the next era, which is going to be kings and prophets, I want to kind of slow down to discuss now that Israel is a nation, there is a code, not a code necessarily, but a word that nation had that unified the entire nation. And that word is the name of the Father. So this unlocking the code concept is really about naming the person that we worship. And that's not us naming him. It's him allowing us to understand what his name is. Because on earth, right now, that name is hidden. The name of the Father is hidden on earth right now. And it has not always been that way. In fact, if you go back about 500 years before the King James Bible, the name wasn't hidden then. It was very widely and well known, right? You go 500 years before that, it wasn't hidden then. 500 years before that, it wasn't hidden then. All the way back to the time of the Egyptians in 1300 BC, we have evidence that the name was widely known, right? That's how far back we have the name being used, right around the time of Moses. That's how far back we have it in text, of course. But then you even have instances going back further than that we won't get too deep into right now. But you do have a singularity of worship. Do you understand what I mean? A singularity of worship is worshiping in one direction, right? And so Zephaniah, and what's interesting about Zephaniah is that, his name, for one, means Yah is hidden, right? Yah has hidden. And people interpret that to mean, okay, well, during this period of time that Yah hid a certain amount of Hebrews so that the Hebrews would be able to survive. But also, there's a lot going on in prophecy there. Yah has hidden is clearly a shalom, shalom. What's that? Another time. Yes, please. So, so you have in that time period Zephaniah prophesying, and he makes a prophecy in the 3rd chapter where he tells everyone. Well, first thing he does is he identifies in the future where a lot of Israelites are going to be. And so he says, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, the daughter of my dispersed brings me supplicants, right? So he's saying that from west of East Africa, there will be Hebrews coming and coming to worship, right? In that direction, from west of the rivers of Ethiopia, which is in East Africa. So Central and West Africa, he's saying, the daughter of my dispersed ones will be coming through that way, right? He then also says, in that day, that he will restore the tongue of the people to a pure language, that they may all worship him as one, right? And so this is an important announcement here because in Zephaniah's time, and correct me if I'm wrong, Zephaniah is in the time of Josiah, there was no question about what Yah's name was, right? No question, right? So the question is, how does Yah's name here in the 3rd chapter, how is this a prophecy that the languages will change to such an extent that Yah won't be able to be worshipped in accord? So the languages are going to change so much that Yah's worship is going to be affected. What could be changed about the language that could affect Yah's worship, right? Well, first thing is Yah, the name itself. If the language continues to change and change and change, Yah here is predicting that the name will be hidden, right? If you understand from the future this prophecy that, okay, in the future, everybody's going to be of one language so that we can all worship as one. I mean, you may understand it as though, okay, well, he wants to be worshipped in one pure tongue, like Hebrew or whatever. But from this future perspective, you understand it clearly. Like, wow, okay, not only are we all going to be worshiping in the same language, we're not going to have confusion about what his name is. Do you understand that that's important? Because that prophecy is given by a person named Zephaniah, right? Zephaniah, right? And so that name, that means Yah is hidden, or Yah has hidden. That's what it means. That's what Zephaniah means. And it just so happens that in this era, not only is he hidden from a lot of people, definitely his name is. Because they're calling him everything from Ahiah to Jehovah, right? So we have a huge misunderstanding. We have not unlocked the code yet. We have not broken through the veil to be able to understand as one people who it is that we worship. Scripture says, what is his name? What is his son's name, if you can tell? Right? That's in Proverbs 30 or 29? I can't remember. What is his name? What is his son's name, if you can tell? That's important because that insinuates that you may not be able to tell. And from the perspective of the proverb writer, he could tell. And he had to understand that there may come a time when people can't tell. or that some people on earth, even at that time, wouldn't be able to tell, right? And so I want to say a word for you guys. And if you've been following the channel closely, I've gone over this before. I have to say just a disclaimer. The name of the Father is the most important word in the scripture. And it's also the most misinterpreted or overinterpreted, maybe even underinterpreted word also in scripture. So a lot of people don't even deal with it whatsoever, right? Most people that believe in the Bible don't deal with the name whatsoever, which is problematic to begin with, right? But the people that do have problems throughout the board, interpretations throughout the board. So it's a code. It's a code. It's a secret that on this earth, I think that it can be cracked, but I do think that people do have to weigh the evidence instead of going with an interpretation, right? And so I want to give you a word, starting out. So you guys know, if you've been following the channel, we have switched from Yahuwah to YAW or YAO, right? And so we still utilize the Yod Hey Wah Hey form, because that's what you see, but we understand it in a different way. And so let me explain it. So the best way that I can explain it to you guys is from an existing word that you guys already have in your English understanding. And it's important that you recognize that it's in your English understanding correct, but you just have to hear it. You have to hear it. I had a teacher who had actually come through Ghana, years before I did, and he kind of expounded the same thing. He didn't come up with the same conclusion. I think he still had a bit of a curve in the way that he was processing, what he was seeing, but he came to a very similar conclusion by listening to the way that the Africans pronounce words. And I think we've gone over this before, that the name Yao or Yao is here in West Africa, right? It's a deity, the deity's name in West Africa. It's a problem with that, because clearly this deity is not the deity from the Bible. It's somebody else, right? They worship him on a different day. They don't have a text associated with him. They have different customs for this particular God, right? And so people say, whoa, what is that all about, right? And so you guys have to understand that this is not uncommon, right? You even go back to Jupiter or Jupiter, right? And so Jupiter or Jupiter is Yao Pater, right? Yao Pater, which is Yao Pater. Pater in Latin is father. So the term Jupiter, even in the pagan religion, is a play off the name of the father, right? Yao Pater is Jupiter. That's, even though Jupiter is a different god, this is the way that the pagans have incorporated, the pagans and the demons that are associated with the pagans' worship, have incorporated the Father's name into their own worship, because they kind of have to, right? That's the reason why there's a pagan deity named El, right? El is a term for Elohim. This is one whose name is El, even though there's God's many and Lord's many, right? Like it says in 1 Corinthians 8. I think you check me on my address. You guys have heard the term before. There's Elohim, right? There's different Elohim, and some of those Elohim use Hebrew words as their name. There's one today, Allah. Allah is El, right? It's just the general term for God in Hebrew, but this particular God used it as his name, right? And so in scripture, you see Yah referred to as El and Allah. And so you have to understand the makeup of the ancient world to understand why things are the way that they are. It's not uncommon for one culture to pick up the true Elohim and try to mix his name into their culture, right? So that's what we're dealing with here in West Africa. We know the Hebrews came through here in West Africa. We know that because there's slave castles right there on the coast, 2 of them, right? I'm within 20 minutes of 2 slave castles, actually 3. So we know the Hebrews came through here. We know the Hebrews went to America after that. We know they've been in bondage for the past 400 years, 500 years, because in this country, we were in bondage because we had rivals and things in Africa, right? Before slavery, right? And so we understand all that. So we have to be able to see a remnant of that culture here in West Africa. And we do. We do. And it's in the name YAW. YAW is a name. It's the name of a deity. It's also the name of a Thursday-born man. So there are a lot of people here in Africa named YAW, right? And that's important because in Hebrew culture, there's lots of people named YAW. And I'm going to prove it to you right here in English. Listen to this word. And I was trying to get to this word to explain it to you guys so that you guys will understand the trueness of how this is interpreted, right? And it is still an interpretation. No interpretation is 100%. But listen. Matthew. 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 Do you hear it? Matthew, right? Matthew. In Hebrew, it would be Mattiyahu, if you were pronouncing every syllable as it's written, right? But in lived language, in the way that you actually pronounce and perceive it, it's Matthew. Matthew. Matit Yao. It's Matit Yao in English. It's just said a little bit fast. Matthew, right? And the U at the end is spelled with a W, right? Matit Yao. Matthew. Do you hear it? Do you hear how if you're an English speaker and you're hearing somebody whose name is Matit Yao, that you would hear Matthew, that you may hear Matthew, right? Matthew. Oh, this guy's name is Matthew. I wonder how that's spelled. Do you understand? Do you understand that in your lived language today, the remnant of the name exists there for you to just one day recognize and pick it up? Matthew means the gift of Yao. So it's almost undoubtedly so that Yao is the name of the Father. The evidence points there. And I'm just talking about modern evidence. I'm not just talking about modern evidence. You jump back 2,000 years to all the church fathers. They all pointed to Yao. More often than not, Yao. And they spelled it in Greek. They say church fathers, call no man your father. But this is the evidence from people who were around Hebrew communities, right? To where that they can pick up these documents. One, I believe it was Jerome, said that he couldn't even get any good documents, right? He had to go to Jerusalem. He had to go to Jerusalem and get the Hebrew version of Matthew because there was a pre-Greek Matthew book, right? We know for a fact that Matthew was written in Hebrew because if it's either Origen or Jerome, but one of those 2 early Christian Greeks went to Jerusalem often and picked up, not copies of the Hebrew Matthew, but was able to read it because he never necessarily, and you guys have to check me on my history, whether it's Jerome or Origen and whether he was able to obtain the Hebrew copy or not. But what he did do was he got and we know this because this is in one of his writings, is that he got a parchment of the differences because he is searching for the truth too. He got a parchment of the differences between the Matthew that he has and the Matthew that was in Jerusalem. and there were differences, that the Greek Matthew was different from the Hebrew Matthew, and in some very important ways. And I'll have to get into that at another time. But you do the research on this, on the difference between the Hebrew Matthew, the original Matthew, and then the Greek Matthew that we have today. But the important point is that they had early Hebrew copies of the New Testament. And in these Hebrew copies, the name is there. The name is right there. And here, in this particular one, YAW is there. You have these early Greek Christians who are listening to the way that they worship in the synagogue, listening to Hebrews that are worshiping Messiah or worshiping through Messiah and worshiping the Father. You see this and you hear who they are worshiping, and you try your best in your language to recreate that sound. And in 9 out of 10 times, they used the iota, so it's the iota, the alpha, and the omega. And when you put that together, it's YAO. They didn't have the Y necessarily, the Y. They had an E sound, so this is the YAO. But they do have the U sound, and they also have an additional A sound. So they could have spelled Yahuwah very easily, but they never did. They never did. They spelled YAO. 9 out of 10 times, YAO. Go back to the Egyptian writing that is in the 13th century BC that they found in Ethiopia. YAO. The Shazu people that worship YAO. Do you understand what I'm saying? I was so confused about why there was never any indication that any name in the scripture had the full name in it, that the hay fell off every time, that the book of Isaiah's real name is Yeshayahu, right? And so Yeshayahu, why was it not Yeshayahuah, right? And the explanation I was given was, the hay is a weak hay, so the hay falls off. But wait, isn't the hay important enough to pronounce the name with? And then why is it unnecessary at the end of Isaiah's name? How come every other pagan deity gets his full name in the name of his worshipers, like Belshazzar and doggone Nebuchadnezzar and all of these other ones, right? How come their name isn't shortened to oblivion in their names? Why is Yahoo just as good as Yahuwah, right? Why? Why is that the same thing? I never got that Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, which is Jeremiah, Nehemyahu, which is Nehemiah. I never understood why it wasn't Nehemyahuah, Yirmiyahuah, Yeshayahuah. I never got it. The answer is that in which you come to when you get to this, when you hear Africans trying to pronounce the name, what you come to understand is that the O is prominent in this part of the world. In the East, you have O. You have to understand that here, they say O after everything. It's not good O. I'm sorry O. It's too much O. And you see it, and when you see it, it's on the back of trucks, it's, on billboards and advertisements, and they spell it O, which you think would be ooh, right? That would, in, American English, it would be ooh, but they say oh, and they use it very, very, very often. It's almost as if it's a part of whatever word that you're pronouncing. They, instead of Sprite, sometimes they say Sprite-to. Instead of Ghana, they say Gano. Sometimes they say Gano. I'm like, what is Gano? But it's so common in this part of the world that it just morphs into the language already. And so you hear in the end of the word, the name of Yah, right? The Yod, Hey, Wah, Hey. You've got Yod Hey coming together to make Yah, clearly indicating that Yah is the way that you pronounce the Yod Hey. But then you have YAW Hey, and that is perceived as O in Shalom and Hey as in the first syllable. But what if you don't have 3 syllables? What if the 2 letters at the end of the word are pronounced as one sound, just like the 2 letters in the first syllable are pronounced as one sound? And because you have a different letter starting each syllable, you have a different 1-syllable sound. So the first one starting with a yod would be Yah. The second one starting with the wa or wa would be oh, like O-H. Instead of A-H, O-H. YAOH. And do you hear how YAOH cracks the code? So wait a second. You don't have to have the hey at the end if you understand that that wa is an O. And then Yeshayahu is Yeshayahu. Yirmiyahu is Yirmiyahu. And you can spell Ya'o as Yod He Wa He or Yod He Wa. You could spell them both the same way and not lose the integrity of the name of Yah. So you have to understand that writing even in itself is something that humans need. If you are an all-knowing, all-seeing entity, or even if you're a lesser being that's made out of energy, what do you need to write stuff down for? Your body is a symbolic language. You can appear as a lion. You can appear as an eagle. You can appear as a man. You can appear as a bull, right? The Ezekiel 4-faced angel. You can appear as anything that you want. So you can appear, your appearance can be a language in itself. It's a symbolic language right there, the way that you appear. So what do you need to write things down for? That's a human quality. And a human quality that hasn't always been necessary either, because pre-flood, we had stronger brain capacity, living longer. So we had more photographic memories. When writing came along, writing came from Enoch, and Enoch really didn't want to do it because at first writing was evil. And I never did understand this. One of my old teachers, same teacher that was teaching me about West Africa, told me, hey, in the original world, writing was evil. You didn't need writing. You just remembered it. And if anybody tried to write something down, people automatically assume, wait a second, what are you trying to change history? Because we remember what happened. We're witnesses. Witnesses outweigh writing, because writing is only one witness. And if you take this one witness's testimony, it's not enough, right? Because we remember, because we're 900 years old, we know that that writing is false. So what are you trying to pull here, right? Do you see what I mean? But Enoch, having to write, having now the commandment to write, has to now write. You know, that came after. That wasn't something that was originally intended to be. So I only say that to say this. Our concept of, oh, it has to be spelled right is flawed for that reason. Because spelling is is new. It's word. It's the word. It's the sound, right? You know, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. He did that with the word. In the beginning was the word, right? Not the spelled word, but the sound word. And if it's YAO, it doesn't need to be spelled the same way every time. If you understand that it's YAO, do you get it? Matit YAO. Matyao. Do you hear it? And so when you understand this, a lot of things make sense. All of a sudden, Joseph makes sense, because that also used to trip me out about the name of the Father. That not only could you drop the last hey, but you could also drop that middle hey too and end up with Yosef, right? Why is Yosef, which means Yao has added, why is the Yod Wa good enough for the name of the Father too? That was another mystery to me, just as puzzling as the hey being dropped off of the end of the name, right? at the end of a name in a name, right? The Yahoo, what we just talked about. Also, more puzzling to me was, dang, not only do you not need the last hey, you don't need the middle one either. So you're just left with YAW in Joseph's name. Why is that able to be that way? Why is the name of the Father, why can it be broken down that simply? That seems like a corruption. But understand it in the way that we just talked about. YAW. That's still yo. Do you hear it? YAO. 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 Yosef. 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 Do you hear it? Do you hear the singularity of worship? Do you hear the continuity of pronunciation? We're not talking about Yahusef. We're talking about Yosef. Right? Right? Do you hear how that's in lived language? The same thing. We only ever see Yahusef pronounced or spelled Yod, He, Wah, Samik, Fe once in the text. And I can't remember if it's in Psalms or in Genesis, but it's only spelled like that one time. But it's meant like that every time. Yosef. That Yahusef is actually still Yosef. That Yod, He, Wah, He is YAO. YAO. And you can even spell it YAW. And our Mashiach is YAOH. Do you hear it? YAOH. Our Mashiach is YAOH. You guys back on, right? Yeah, we're good too. So that is the code. That's what makes the most sense historically. It's what makes the most sense grammatically as far as lived language is concerned. And it makes the most sense from what we see from the remnant of our people today, from the places that we've been and the influences that we've had, right? That's what we see with the evidence that we have to this point in the future. YAO is the name of the Father. Okay, so this has been Theory of Everything 24, and a little bit of a disclaimer. Everybody has the opportunity to be wrong. Listen, I wrote a paper about Yahuwah. I wrote a 30-page paper about Yahuwah with sources and, college paper, final paper for college to graduate about the name of Yahuwah, and was wrong. And I'm sitting there doing the research, seeing all of these different instances of YAO, and it's just not making sense to me. And it's just not making sense to me. Not that I'm listening to the evidence, that I'm actually reading the evidence and saying the evidence is pointing me in this direction. No, I've got Yahuwah in my brain, and the things that are telling me, okay, well, this can't be Yahuwah, I'm ignoring, right? That's what I'm doing writing this paper, because I've got Yahuwah on my mind, and I've got that as my destination no matter what I find. And so I was finding the entire time, wait a second, it's pointing towards YAO. I even had a buddy that I would argue with, he was a Christian, he was on the way to becoming a Christian pastor, and I'm of course a Hebrew in, and for me, Hebrew school. I'm a Hebrew in Hebrew school, and he's a Christian in Christian school, becoming a Christian pastor, right? And he's taking Greek. I'm a Hebrew. I'm not, seeing the need for me to take Greek, even though I can see that it's a necessity now. I just didn't have, the motivation to take Greek. I wanted to take Hebrew, right? And so I would ask him all my Greek questions. Wait, how was this letter pronounced? How was this letter pronounced? And so when we got to the name of the Father and all the Greek part of my research, hey, this 3-letter, which looks like I, capital I, A-W, lowercase a, lowercase w. How do you pronounce that? And he said, YAO. I said, not Yahoo? He said, nope. And I said, No? I said, no, YAO. If it was U, it would be this other letter, this other Greek letter. But it's not. It's an omega, and the omega is pronounced O. And I said, oh, okay. And then I completely ignored it for the next 5 years. Now, here we are in West Africa, and YAO is a reality. People named YAO here where we know Hebrews were. So again, this just been a little bit of a tangent just to let people know you can be wrong. And then we can be wrong here even with what we're talking about today. Because eventually we do know that the Father will come down and, like he says in Zephaniah 3:10 or 3:9, that he will restore a pure tongue to the people so that they can come together and worship him in one consent, right? So we recognize that prophecy is going to come to pass, but we want to be on top of things ourselves. And so we are, anticipating the day as well, but we are also still in deep study and trying to make sure that we get it right. Okay, you guys, this has been Theory of Everything 24, Unlocking the Code. Shalom, shalom.